All right, fellow moots. Before we get back to the Batesian to give our decision, I think the only responsible thing is to deliberate together and make sure we're all on the same page.
I agree. Let's cast a blind vote. Everyone, please write down the name of the party you think is liable on these pieces of paper. Pedestrian. 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 Aliva Industries. Who would like to plead their case?
Well, I was assuming the car was most similar to an ox.
Me too, because an ox inflicts damage as a result of its ability to move independently, unlike a fire which only inflicts damage as a result of other forces acting on it. In this case, the car moves by itself into Shimon Shalom's car, and therefore is more similar to an ox.
I think the car can be classified as a Tom ox because this is the first crash caused by an Aliva car.
Which is why the pedestrian is at fault. They were jaywalking, which is illegal, and they caused the accident. Someone who indirectly causes damages is responsible for them. The pedestrian didn't mean to cause the accident, but they did, so they're responsible.
Well, I thought it was Aliva Industries because they programmed the car to swerve when the pedestrian came its way. I think that this case of damage is most similar to the Talmudic example of a fire that destroys property. The person who lit the fire is responsible for any damage caused by it. Aliva programmed the car, so you could say they lit the fire.
And since the car is an inanimate object, it only moves because of its pre-programmed instructions.
Even if the damages are actually caused by some external factor, such as wind.
So then the pedestrian is just the wind driving the fire, i.e. the car in a certain direction.
And it doesn't make sense to incriminate the wind.
Also, your parallel from Baba Kama about the principle of grama, or indirect damages, can be disproven by another Gemara, where it says that you are always exempt from paying for damages if they were caused indirectly.
So then maybe Aliva should take pedestrians into account when they program their cars. After all, jaywalking is a reality in society. Thus, even though the pedestrian acted illegally, they were acting normally, which is called orach da'ara. Thus, jaywalkers can be anticipated.
So it's not the pedestrian? I think that I'm more confused than I was when I started.
We're dealing with the Talmud here. What were you expecting?
Why don't we try this again? Everyone, please put your opinions in this hat and I'll read them out. Aliva. 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 Miss Rubenstein.
It has to be Aliva. They programmed the car.
And Aliva did not program it fittingly. There's no manual override. Would the car be a tied-up ox?
I don't think the car can be classified as a tied-up ox. The programming doesn't tie it up. It creates the car's nature. Just like an ox's nature is to cause damage, Aliva does not allow the ability for its creation's nature to be restrained, which would have been in the form of a manual override.
Besides, because of the rapid progression of events, even if there had been a manual override, there's no guarantee it would have done anything. Therefore, I think this can be declared as a case of ones, an unavoidable accident.
I disagree. I think Rachel is at fault because the Mishnah says that if someone digs the last tefach of a pit and an animal falls in and dies, they are liable for the damage caused by the entire pit. When Rachel turned on her car, she completed what Aliva started.
And we know from Bava Kama, in a case of ones, an owner who cannot prevent their ox from damaging is still held liable, meaning Rachel Rubenstein.
Yes, and Tosfot says that the owner is only responsible if the accident was caused by carelessness. And there was no carelessness in this case because her behavior of listening to the podcast is seen as what is natural and expected for riding in any car, let alone a self-driving car.
Furthermore, the Mishnah Torah says that an owner is obligated to pay for damages caused by their animals. No ifs, ands, or buts. Miss Rubenstein has to be responsible because she is the owner.
Shall we go back to the hat? Miss Rubenstein. Miss Rubenstein. Aliva. Miss Rubenstein.
I skipped 2 chavrutas, a siyum, and a bris for this. This has gone on way too long. Can't we just follow the majority and be done? Here's an idea. Let's just put the juror who disagrees in cherem.
Who still thinks Aliva Industries is responsible?
I do. I'm still uncertain about this.
All right, Pitkei Choshen views this scenario as the opposite of digging the pit, in that a person who starts a process is responsible for the end result. Thus, if the car is like a fire, then when Miss Rubenstein turned on the car, it is like she lit the fire.
Even though Aliva programmed the car, this would be like them setting up a pile of wood or a box of matches. It does not become harmful until the fire is lit or until the car is turned on.
Also, the previous argument that Oliva was responsible because they did not program the car fittingly for normal circumstances, since there was no manual override, does not apply, because normal circumstances do not require manual overrides.
So do we all agree that Ms. Rubenstein is responsible? Or shall I put our thoughts into the hat once more?
We don't need to go back to the hat. I'm convinced. Ms. Rubenstein is chayav.
So it's unanimous. We can officially announce our verdict.
Not yet. We still have to decide on how much Ms. Rubenstein must pay.
So we're back to the hat one more time. Everyone, please write down how much you think she has to pay. Half. All. Half. All. Who would like to plead their case?
I think it's half, because the Gemara says that if an ox trips, the owner is responsible for half the damage.
You're the one who's tripping here. The damage is produced by Karen, goring, not tripping. The car's swerving is not part of the expected behavior of the car, just as an ox is not expected to gore. Rachel owns the car, and we know from the Mishnah Torah that when a person's ox damages their friend's ox by goring it, the owner has to pay for the damage their ox caused.
We also see in Bava Kama that when someone takes on the care of something, then they have acknowledged that it may cause damage. In doing so, they accept monetary liability for the damage it caused. We've already established that Ms. Rubenstein did the preparation by buying the car and turning it on.
So have we reached a conclusion? Ms. Rubenstein is chayav for all damages caused to Mr. Shalom in the accident.
Let's just recap to make sure we're all clear. We first thought that the pedestrian was at fault because they instigated the accident. However, this was refuted through the analogy of the pedestrian as a wind, which blows a fire because it provides a model of a force that, while responsible for spreading the fire, cannot be held accountable for the damages. According to this logic, Oliva would be responsible because they were the ones who lit the fire by creating the car's program.
Alternatively, we thought that this case might be more analogous to an ox which gores, because the car, like the ox, acts independently. In the end, we decided that both of these examples lead to the same conclusion about who is responsible and how much they must pay.
While initially, we thought that Oliva was at fault because they programmed the car. We concluded that Rachel Rubenstein is fully culpable based on the principle that one who completes a pit is fully responsible for what damages it may cause. And one who starts a process is responsible for the end result. Additionally, the owner of an ox is fully responsible for the damages it caused through goring, regardless of what drove the ox to gore.
Well, ultimately, we think that Oliva has a flaw in its programming to not allow a manual override, and that it minimized only fatalities, not fatalities and damages. It is still Rachel's fault for taking ownership of a potentially dangerous car. While we may suggest that she seek further settlement with Oliva if she feels that the dangers the car presented were not made apparent, in this case, we think that Rachel Rubenstein is fully responsible for the damage caused by her vehicle to Shimon Shalom.
So we all agree?
Yeah?
Yep. Let's finally put away the hat.
We yield to any questions and cross-examinations.
Judges, thank you very much. The judges now have 9 minutes.
Can you please restate the argument why pedestrian is not liable?
So the pedestrian is not liable because it is a case of indirect damages or a grama, and the Mishnah and the Gemara in Bava Kama 60b says that any damages that were caused indirectly, the person who indirectly causes damages is patur.
Is it possible that nobody's liable?
Yeah, we don't think that no one is liable. We think that Rachel Rubenstein is fully liable because damages were caused, and we know from Mishnah Torah that wherever damages are caused, someone is liable. The owner of the vehicle or the animal that caused the damages is liable, which places blame on Ms. Rubenstein. However, additionally, given that we feel that Oliva had some sort of fault in not allowing a manual override, or in only minimizing fatalities and not damages, we feel that Ms. Rubenstein is responsible for sort of willingly taking on the risks of the car by buying it and turning it on and using it.
I'd like to look at the possibility a little bit, to get a little more detail if you're thinking of distinguishing between chatzi nezek and full nezek. You reject the possibility that the animal was, in theory, Chatzinazek is when the animal is being properly used. And it gores anyway, then there's a limitation of liability. Are we assuming that she was not properly using the car, or are we assuming that that's not the correct case?
So in our case, we decide that the car is classified, so the ox can be classified as Karen or Regel, which is like with a horn or with a foot.
Or Shen, which
Shen.
is tooth, but obviously
We,
that's not.
we eliminated that off the bat. But then we classify it as Karen instead of tripping. We don't think that the ox used its legs, like the analogy that we said that we said that the car didn't trip into the other lane. We said that it swerved intentionally, and because it was intentional and not accidental, we think that Rachel owes whole damages.
You analogized Rachel's liability to the case of a pit. The last to touch, I guess, the last to leave a dangerous situation. Would that mean that your analogy is because she actually turned on the engine, or was it just her ownership of the car?
So ultimately, it's both, but specifically in this case, it's the fact that she turned it on, but obviously she couldn't necessarily have turned it on without having the car in her possession.
What do you consider Aliva's responsibility to change their programming?
We don't think that, in this case, we think it's beyond the scope of this case to charge Aliva with anything, but we do think that it is possible for Rachel to go back to Aliva, and if it was not clear to her when she was purchasing the car that such a case could have happened, that maybe it wasn't clear that that is the way that the car's programming works, it only minimizes fatalities, not fatalities and damages, then she could take up further argument with Aliva. But we don't think in this case Aliva has to pay any damages because Rachel Rubenstein bought the car and she is fully responsible for it.
So if she'd been driving the car herself, if it has not been a self-driving car, but she had in fact been driving the car herself, and she herself had swerved and hit the other car in the effort to save the pedestrian, would that have rendered her more or less liable by your line of argumentation? What is the self-driving nature of the car to you?
We think that it's essentially the same because it's still her car, she still turned it on, and she is still the main actor in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I would like to thank all teams and congratulate you not only for your amazing presentations today, but for a full year of hard work, deliberating, written decision, and oral presentation. And I have to say, I'm happy I'm not one of the judges that needs to judge right now. We would now ask all students and advisors to leave the room so the judges can have the room in order to deliberate. Just 1 minute before you get up. Just give me 1 more minute for some more instructions. If any of you are interested, many of the rooms, we only had 4 teams in this room, many of the rooms are still running and will be doing so for quite some time. So as you're leaving the room, please do it silently in order not to disturb the other rooms. If any of you are interested to join any other rooms to see any other presentations, feel welcome to do so. Please enter any room only during the break time between presentations in order to not to distract any teams who are presenting at that time. In any case, please all meet in the Sam Houston room, which is the room we've been using as our dining room over the Shabbaton at 12:15 exactly 12:15 for the closing ceremony, the winners and everything else. And again, you shall proc to all the teams and invite.
And Mr. McGill.
Picture next to the board with that.
Yeah, not at all. He's got plenty of time.
Where's our board?